Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Ghost Town is a scenario where you need to build 10 coasters of different types that are at least 1200 meters long and have at least 7 excitement. That length requirement of 1200 meters makes sure you need a lot of space, which is why today I'm going to attempt to beat Ghost Town using just this tiny 15 by 4 square of land. That's right, I think I can manage to build 10 coasters with a length of over a kilometer on this square that's less than half the size of Micropark. First, we're gonna need a way to make money, for which the launched freefall is a great option. If we place it right here, it won't interfere with the coasters that we're gonna build later, so it's the perfect spot. Now we need to research stalls only and fast forward for a year to unlock the cash machine, otherwise guests won't be able to afford the freefall for very long. With a price of over 10 bucks, this will be a decent and steady moneymaker, making us all the money we need. This park has 2 entrances, so half the guests will be on the other side, not being able to ever reach the only ride in the park. Should have chosen the correct entrance, suckers! Alright, now it's time to build the first coaster. Because it has a fairly low support limit, the first coaster I want to build is the compact inverted coaster, which takes almost 3 more years to unlock researching only roller coasters. When we finally have it, we can start building, and after a bit of experimenting I came to this design, which I promise is more than 1200 meters long, even though the track itself is less than 200 meters long. How does that work? Your first instinct might be multiple laps, but that doesn't work as the game only counts the length of a single lap. So we need to somehow make that one lap we have longer. Just like in the last video, we're going to make use of the fact that if a train goes fast enough, it will overshoot the block brake, as a block brake isn't infinitely strong. This ride has 4 block sections, so it can have 3 trains. First we're going to put it into test mode so that the red train departs, and then we quickly open the ride and enable the option to wait for full load. Since guests cannot access the ride, this makes sure that the next train will never depart. In the meantime, the third train has overshot the block brake at the end and entered the station. Now the red train will do the same, except it cannot enter the station yet as the big fat behind of the second train is in the way. When one train is stuck behind another train outside of the station like this, it will move back and forth very slightly, slowly accumulating ride length. And this is the key. If we wait long enough before we unlock the ride, the length of the ride will be over 1200 meters. This will take quite a while, so let's already build the next ride, which will be a normal inverted coaster. Here we'll use the exact same layout and the exact same trick to increase the ride length. Next up is the wooden coaster, which has a stat requirement that it needs at least 2 drops, so let's add a tiny one immediately after the station. Now this one is a bit special as we only need 2 trains to pull off the block brake trick. A 6-car articulated wooden coaster train is the perfect length so that it's long enough to prevent the next train from entering the station, while also being short enough to give it enough time to slow down on the block brake. These coasters all don't reach the required 7 excitement yet, but we'll worry about that once we have 10 coasters that are long enough. Now it's time for the looping coaster, which will be a tad different. Since it also needs the second drop, there is just not enough space to make the block brake method work. We're going to have to try something else, the chain lift method. It's very simple. We leave a gap in the chain lift that is too long for a single train to cross. When it gets there, it will kind of bob up and down, continuously adding length to the ride. Once the ride is long enough, we release the second train, which pushes it across the gap to complete the ride. Next is the twister coaster, for which we'll also use the chain lift method. Except there is a problem, and that is that all the going up and down at the chain lift counts as drops. Well before it's long enough, it reaches the maximum drop count of 63, which gives it exactly 10.01 intensity. This is just 200 too high, and I cannot make the ride any less intense. We need the curved drop to optimize space usage, and we also need the steep bit to get enough negative G's to prevent stat penalties. The only thing I can think of is shortening the trains to the minimum of 4 cars, which works, as now for some reason it doesn't get extra drops at the chainlift cap, which is weird but useful. We've had one twister coaster, but what about second twister coaster? This may seem useless as we need 10 different coaster types, but for this requirement it already counts as a different type if you're just using different trains, and since we have the floorless trains available, that will work just fine. By this time some of the coasters have broken down, so I decided to give them all their own mechanic to make sure they stay operational. The 7th coaster will be a hyper twister, which has an issue. The minimum train length of 3 cars sticks slightly out of the station, and the block brake doesn't slow down the incoming train fast enough to prevent a crash. To solve this we need one extra track piece in between the brake and the station, but then we can't get high enough in time. Maybe we can fix this with a so-called steep lift hill, but it seems the train is just too short to reach the next bit of the chain lift. But what if we increase the chain lift speed to 12 km per hour? Maybe then it'll have enough speed to just reach it, and it works. Except pretty soon after I realized that this wasn't necessary, as I had simply forgotten to put chain lift on this piece on my first attempt. Now that this coaster is done, we go from the hyper twister to the hyper coaster, which is easily done with the chainlift method. Next is the vertical drop coaster, which will be a bit different as it needs a 15 meter drop to prevent its stats being divided by 2 instead of the 13 meter drop we've been using so far. This is no problem, and the vertical drop coaster is easily finished as well. Lastly, there is the coaster with the highest support limit of all, the Giga Coaster. The challenge here is that we need to use the chainlift method, but we also need a 5-tile station and a second drop, and the trains aren't long enough to do the steep lift hill trick. However, since this is the last coaster we're gonna build, we don't need to reserve space for anything above it, so we can simply take the chainlift around one time to get high enough that way. While building the Giga Coaster I ran out of money, which is because the launched freefall broke down and the wrong mechanic got assigned to fix it. And when taking him off the job, another wrong mechanic took the call. Idiot. Alright, I'll just delete and rebuild the freefall by increasing the loan. But immediately after finishing the Giga Coaster, the problem turns out to be much worse than it seemed, as pretty much every mechanic is wrongly assigned. Time to build a path to connect all ride exits, which is not gonna be cheap, but we'll manage. Now that all 10 coasters are built, let's unlock them and see how long they actually are. Because the effectiveness of the methods used differs for every ride, the lengths span quite a big range. The shortest ride is actually the Twister Coaster with a reasonable 1428 meters, and the longest is the Hyper Coaster with a ridiculous 27.7 kilometers. Also, the ride durations somehow wildly differ. It goes from the Hyper Twister's 28 seconds to the Hyper Coaster's 4 hours and 17 minutes. The ride length requirements are now fulfilled, but none of the rides reach 7 excitement yet, so let's start working on that. An obvious first step is to give them all the synchronization bonus of 0.4. Problem is, the path is in the way, so for now I can only give it to the compact invert, the rest will have to wait until the end. And now it's scenery time, for which I'll use my favorite tiny scenery item, the Bull Rush. Open RCT2 scatter tool helps a lot here, and with ease I can place these tiny weeds wherever there is space. Just the scenery bonus isn't enough for most coasters here, so it's also time for some path bonuses, mainly the head chopper ones. After having done a few of these, I clicked the Giga Coaster and noticed that it only has 3.8 excitement, which is because it doesn't get enough negative vertical G's. No problem, I'll just add in the steep drop bit that I forgot earlier and it should be fine. Except, because the train is fairly long, this time the bobbing up and down does again count as extra drops, so it gets a lot of intensity from its 63 drops. But against all odds, the Giga Coaster is such a chat that even with this it still stays below 10 intensity while also immediately providing more than the required 7 excitement. With some more path and a bit of water, I managed to get all other rides to a high enough excitement rating as well, except for the compact inverted coaster at the bottom. It's just too terrible, this isn't going to work. Luckily it's very close to the ground, so we can replace it with a wild mouse coaster. With the single car trains we need a lot of cars to pull off the block brake method, but that is possible by abusing its ability to put chain lift on steep track pieces to create a lot of block sections. The final thing now we need to do is add all the stations for the synchronization bonuses, and then we're ready to open the rides and beat the scenario. And there we go, we have just beaten Ghost Town by building 10 1200 meter long coasters on a 15x4 square of land. If you enjoyed this scenario challenge, you might like this video about beating Amity Airfield with just one ride as well. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.